Hi, this is Chris Hoy. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. Today I will be showing you how to paint this adorable little mini bunny treat box using simple tricks and techniques that will make any project just a little more impressive. So grab your brushes and let's get started. I do seal all of my pieces with multi-purpose sealer and lightly sand. This will provide a nice smooth base that will ensure even coverage. And I'm using my number 10 Fantastic Filbert to base coat with buttermilk. This will take a couple coats. I'm making sure that each layer is nice and smooth and even. And then I add a little bit of Whispering Turquoise around the bunny, just to give a background on that. I do let each coat dry between applications. I wanted a white bunny, so I have picked up Snow White on the toe of my 1/2 inch awesome angle, and I'm just tapping the Snow White in a little bit heavier on the right side toward the middle, and using the clean edge of the heel to just kind of feather that white out so there's no hard edges. I use probably about 2 to 3 light coats of white each time, making sure I want the face area nice and bright, and the tops and the right hand side is where my light source is, so really need to brighten those up. Switch to my number 2 Radical Round to base coat the ears, inside of the ears and the nose with cotton candy, and just smooth it out again. There's going to be 2 coats on that to get a nice coverage. Using the egg stencil to stencil the egg with purple petal, using my number 4 Spectacular stencil brush, just a little bit of paint, a light coverage. 2 coats is always better than 1. The flower can be stenciled if you have the Floral Friend template, or just stroked with a number 2 Radical Round. I do use a pencil to kind of dot where the center of the eyes are, using the Painter's Pal to stencil the eyes with soft black. Always dry in between so they don't smear. Just a very light coverage of paint. 2 light coats, always going to provide best results. Ensure those clean, crisp edges when stenciling. Shading around the outer edge of the ears with Wild Berry. Just that little bit of paint does make such a big difference, and it only takes a second to add that in. I've loaded my Epic script liner with Wild Berry. I thought it would be fun to add a little bit of design inside the ears, and then I'll carry that through on the feet as well. Highlighting the top and middle of the egg with a light float of Snow White. And I'm using my 1/2 inch awesome angle to float that on and just give it a little more roundness. Dip dot of Snow White in the eyes, and then in the bottom right corner I always like to put a teeny tiny comma stroke and a little bit of a smaller highlight. Just really makes those eyes come to life and add a sparkle. Using the Epic script liner and soft black to paint the eyelashes and add the eyebrows. Back to the nose, a little bit of Wild Berry on the bottom and up the sides, and to highlight that top, just a dip, dot, and drag of the Stylus and Snow White perfect comma stroke. I wanted my bunny to have some shading, but I wanted it to still be white, so I'm using just a very, very thin float of light cinnamon on the toe of my angle. And it's mostly water, just a hint of color. Doesn't take much to make a big difference. I'll say that often, but how true it is. And I'm just floating it mostly along the bottom and the left sides, but any areas that need defined, this is really a good way to add dimension very quietly. And I'll toggle between the shading and the highlights just to even it out. So after I put the light cinnamon on, I'm going to go back with Snow White, just to ramp up those bright areas. And you can see how much brighter that little ear is with just that little bit of white on it. And I do this several times throughout just to make sure that those bright areas stay bright. Just a hint of that light cinnamon around the eyes, underneath the eyebrows, just kind of helps to set everything in the face so it doesn't look like it's stuck on. I decided instead of dry brushing the cheeks, I would use the template. I'm using my Painter's Pal, just a whisper of Wild Berry on my stencil brush, drag it across a paper towel a few times just to get rid of excess paint, and then lightly dry brush. Add 3 dip dots of Snow White. I think it looks so cute that way. But to add a little bit more, I floated Wild Berry around the bottom of the cheeks, and look how they stand out and become round and dimensional. Wanted to add a few flowers on the egg, and I just kind of marked where the center was, and then I can go in and pull those petals around. I'm using cactus flower and my Epic script liner. These are decorative eggs, so they don't have to be perfect, and I think it's fun just to kind of be creative with design on the eggs. So if there's a design that is really fun to do, just get creative and do your own thing. These are fun pieces, and that's what makes them fun, is just to create your own design. Adding a couple stripes of the purple or the cotton cactus flower on the eggs at the top and the bottom. And then I decided those white stripes needed to be just a little bit more defined. So I outlined both sides with some white dip dots. And look what a difference that makes. It just really makes them stand out. It's all these little touches that really kind of ramp it up. I switched to the smaller end of the stylus and added some dip dots between those cactus flower stripes at the top and the bottom. And again, I'm letting everything dry really well before I go back and add the second layer. Dip dotted the centers with banana cream, and then brighten those petals with another coat of cactus flower. What a fun egg. And to make those pink stripes at the top and the bottom stand out a little bit more, I just added some cotton candy highlights right there in the center. Just makes it a little more round. Add some white highlights in the flower centers and a couple places on the petals. These little touches make such a difference. I'm using lavender to shade around the bottom and the downside of the eggs. And I'm using the same color and my awesome angle to shade the base of each one of those petals, kind of pull it out to create veining on each one of the petals. And I'm using the toe of my brush just to do that. Clean the brush, pick up some Snow White, and now I can start to really highlight individual petals, and look how that starts just to evolve all by itself. Dot the center using the handle of my brush and banana cream. I wanted to add a little tiny flower to the side, so I used the toe of my awesome angle. Double loaded my number 4 Fabulous Flat with Plantation Pine and Green Tree. Just kind of touch down and pull out. Keep that dark toward the base of the petal, and that's Hauser Dark Green, not Plantation. And I'm using that same combination to add a little base to that flower bud. You loaded my Epic script liner with Hauser Dark Green to line the branches and pull them up into those leaves. Highlight the top edges with jadeite glass on those leaves, and look what a difference that makes. Just that little bit of paint really makes those leaves stand out. Anywhere it's too dark, just add a little bit of that highlight, kind of brighten that center vein. I brighten those petals on that little bud, and then to make sure they stand out against the bright bunny head, I put just a teeny shadow of light cinnamon below, and now they really look like they're sitting on his head. Position the nose and pull down a little soft black mouth. Wanted to go back and add some highlights all around those flowers just to brighten them up a little bit. I thought little dip dots of Snow White were just exactly what it needed. Not a lot, just enough to really kind of makes it look a little more delicate, and also adds highlights all at the same time. It's just a great way to brighten something up. Now I'm going in to add the little arms and hands, and I could have painted my egg around that, and it just is easier for me just to paint the egg and then go back and put the arms in instead of trying to put all of that detail around the eggs. Just kind of doing the same thing that I did with the body and the face. I'm adding the shading just to make sure everything is in the right position. I haven't painted this before. I'm just kind of going in my head. I was going to say out of my head, which is true in some instances, but I just kind of have to play with it as I paint and make sure everything fits correctly and is balanced and has the right amount of contrast, the right amount of shading and highlighting. Putting all of that shadowing in there. I know down in that box is going to be a little bit darker, but I still went back with a little bit of Snow White to brighten the bunny up. Always dry in between. And now I'm brightening up with some Snow White. Needs to be the same intensity as the face. So I did probably about 3 light coats of Snow White. And more or less kind of tapping it in. I wanted it to look a little bit fluffy and furry. So instead of a smooth, solid float, I'm tapping it in and blending it in at the same time. And that's just going to give a little bit of dimension. Snow White highlight on the egg and the cheeks, and go back and brighten up the flowers if they're needed. I'm never finished until I'm finished, and often once you paint something and add a few more elements in there, you can tell if it needs brightened up a little bit more. Contrast, it's all about contrast. Add more shading to make sure that one part stands out from the other. Adding some green tree, I wanted the little bunny to be in grass, and I'm going to pull grass all around the body. That's why I wasn't too fussy with how the bottom of the body looked. Painting the feet, buttermilk, and this is going to be the same colors that's used on the bunny. And I used the smallest egg stencil for the little pad, the largest pad on the feet. All of these stenciled areas are going to take at least 2 coats. I just use light coverage, using an oval from the Painter's Pal for the center pad, and then a smaller one for each one of the side pads. Gives a variety, and then you don't have to worry about having perfect little shapes on there. Shading wild berry around the sides and across the bottom. And I'm using my 1/8 inch Awesome angle, and I do both, the same for both feet, of course. And that really helps to define those little pads. Now I'm going around all of the little pads with light cinnamon. Be sure to keep that light and just a soft float, and just blend it in. My paint is very, very loose, which means I have a lot of water in it, so I can jump around from one area to the next, and it's still very fluid and very movable, and it's easy to go back and shift it around and make it work. Now I'm going in with Snow White to brighten and add highlights in between those pads, just using the toe of my 1/8 inch angle to float that in. Very, very small area. And while I'm at it, I'm going to highlight the top and the right side of each of those pads. And you can see how just that little bit of brightness starts to pull that paint in and brighten the whole foot up. I like that design in the ears, and I decided to go ahead and add that cross hatching on the feet because I think that just adds a little bit of whimsy. I'm using my Epic script liner. Make sure that the paint flows nice and smooth. I usually do one direction all at the same time, and then I'll flip it over and add the other stripes. But if you're not getting a lot of stroke out of your brush, you don't have enough water in, or it's not loaded correctly, add more water, add more paint, so that reloading just kind of, there we go. If it goes quickly, then you know you have your brush loaded correctly. And then go back and add just that little bit of highlight. Look how cute that is. Perfect. Maybe it needs a little more brightness. This is where you go back and just kind of touch up here and there to brighten that up. I decided to go ahead and paint the base coat background of Whispering Turquoise around the eggs. This is the front piece with the eggs on it. I did use my egg stencil to draw those eggs on there, so I knew exactly where my placement would be. And I'm painting that background just a little bit inside the eggs because I don't want to stencil my eggs on there and have an edge that I have to go back and fill in. So kind of covering up to or almost over that pencil line. And I did all of the side pieces at the same time. I think when they're all painted consecutively, you get more continuity. I'm loading the toe of my 1/2 inch Awesome Angle with Green Tree. Just kind of tap and blend, start at the bottom, work toward the top, and just blend it up. Little bit of paint. It doesn't take much. It does not need to be solid and heavy. Just a soft background filter. Using the egg stencil to stencil the top egg with cotton candy. Nope, I'm using cactus flower, and then I'm highlighting it with cotton candy and just blending that in. Make sure the edges are nice and sharp. And the shading is Wild Berry. And I use my 1/2 inch angle. If you want to bump down to a smaller angle, I kind of like a bigger brush if I can get away with it. Loaded my Epic script liner with Snow White. These decorative lines don't need to be fussy, just something fun and whimsical to decorate the eggs. Going back with Wild Berry just to add a few more decorative lines. And my theme on the eggs is just dots and stripes, just a fun way to fill in the egg and add a little bit of design without being too fussy. I'm dip dotting with Snow White, and just make sure those edges and stripes are nice and quiet and have sharp edges. Let it dry well, and then go back with the Wild Berry to deepen that shading, and also going back with Snow White this time to highlight that top and right side, and make sure to blend it in. Use the number 10 Fabulous Flat to paint that band on the blue egg, which is Whispering Turquoise. Shade the bottom edge of that, or if it were standing up, it'd be the left side with Hauser Deep Green, and line the edge of the stripe with a little bit of Snow White. And I'm using that to kind of even up the edges as well. Adding some fun dip dots with Snow White. And then I'm bringing that cross hatching line work into the egg, the same that I did on the ears. It just kind of pulls everything together. It's just a quick, easy way. Using open water, and here I can sharpen up any edges that are maybe just a little bit uneven and add that shading. And I did go right over that Hauser Dark Green on the stripe with the open water. Highlight the top edge with Snow White and pull that highlight across there. Just really helps to brighten those up. The last color, okay, I decided to do Purple Petal, and then I stenciled it in and decided I didn't want that color, so I am top coating it with Snow White. I thought the purple egg that the bunny was holding, and if there was another purple egg, it would be too dark. I wanted it to be a little more diverse, so I painted it white, and I'm going in with Cactus Flower to paint wide stripes, and I'm just using a single stroke of my brush. The fabulous flats that I have designed have extra length, so it's really nice to be able to do long, smooth stripes. Using Purple Petal and the Epic Script Liner to add some little wiggle lines and edge the pink stripes. Just gives a little bit of variety on that. If it were purple, it would be too heavy. Using Purple Petal to add a few decorative dots in and around that little wiggly line. And some bigger dots down that pink stripe just to break that up. Now, I almost forgot to turn my camera on to do this. To create the grass, I've loaded the toe of my 1/2 inch Awesome Angle with Hauser Dark Green, just kind of tapping and pulling. It's almost, the paint is so loose, it's almost a watercolor technique. And you can see how kind of drippy it is. But because it's so loose, tap and pull, I can manipulate it, I can move it around, I can soften it in. It almost starts to blend out on its own. Just clean the brush and keep adding water. Now I'm going in with my Epic Script Liner and Green Tree. This is where all the detail comes in. So, but this is still very loose. I kind of keep my arm in one place and just let the movement of the wrist create those strokes of grass. And I don't plant my hand on the table. I kind of pull it up and let it be loose. I call it free. Your arm's in the air and you can just pull those up. And what a difference that little bit of paint makes. And let the grass kind of go this way, that way, over the eggs, around the eggs, above the grass line. It just pulls it all in. This will take a little bit of time. Some are very loose and uncontrolled, and others I'm very particular about putting it in certain places. I went back and picked up a little bit of the Hauser Dark Green just to add some more defined, darker grass strokes. But I don't want it too controlled. I like that loose look. So anywhere where the grass needs to be around the eggs, I do go back and get a little bit of dark and then bring the light over top. Start with the Green Tree, go back and pick up a little bit of the Hauser Dark Green. I don't clean my brush. I just kind of go from one color to the next, and it basically blends it on the bristles. If it becomes too muddied or too one color, definitely clean the brush out, but allow the brush to create that flow of dark and light, and then some of those midtones in between. Don't overdo it. More can always be added. I thought because this was more of an Easter, I wanted to add some brightness, so I thought a little bit of speckling would be good to help brighten it up. I'm using the splatter brush. I love it. My fingers don't get messy. I have good control. But don't let it get too heavy. If it's too much, go back and blot some of the heavy ones out. If you need just a couple more, use a stylus to dot a few more in to even it up. Remember, the inside of the box needs painted as well as the outside. So when I painted the inside, I made sure to lay it on a paper towel so I didn't get any residue from the painting area on the top side of the pieces. I painted the bottom of the box with Green Tree and then just shaded around the outer edge with Hauser Dark Green. And remember, all those little tabs need to fit together, so take mine to not get heavy paint in those cutout areas or the little tabs that have to fit. If paint is heavy on those areas, it might need to be lightly sanded before it fits together. Always check those pieces before you glue. And then I use the Aleene's Tacky Glue. Put a little bit on that tab and on the front, and then just snap them together and let it dry. I put a rubber band around it to make sure that it was going to dry well. The top edge, I just went ahead and it can be left unfinished, but I thought for this little box, since it was going to be so visible, that it needed to be painted using Whispering Turquoise. I like to paint with my fingers, but I also can't get in those little tiny areas. So I use the number 2 Radical Round to touch up all of those edges. And remember, we base coated everything Whispering Turquoise before we put the grass on, so I'm just going back to that. It's much easier just to touch up those edges after the box is glued together than to try to paint it and make it blend in when you don't know how they're going to fit. Does that make sense? Once it's together, then they can be very easily blended in. And I'm just taking some of that Hauser dark green to soften that blue, and then going back with some green tree to add those little defined blades of grass. So just kind of lightly wash over it with the Hauser dark, and then go back with the Epic Script Liner and just really stroke in some defined little blades of grass. It won't take much. This is just to blend it in and make it look like it's one box and not several pieces. And it's so easy to match it up at this point. Very loose, light paint. Let it dry, add some more, and you won't even be able to see the edges. I was a little bit concerned with this project when I first started as to how that would work out, but it worked out really well, so I didn't have to worry about it too much. Just little touches. A little bit of paint makes a big difference. That's kind of my whole theme. And you can see my hands just kind of floating. I'm just kind of stroking the little grass in here and there. Not much is needed on the front, but you can see on the sides how dark that is, and look how just that little bit of green tree makes that work really well. The feet, I decided to just glue on the front. I thought they'd be so cute. I varnished all the pieces with Ultra Matte Varnish before assembly. I love how this turned out. This little treat box is great for candy-filled gifts, Easter decor, or you could paint one for everyone at your Easter table. If you are enjoying this video, please like, hit the bell, and subscribe. That way you won't miss out on upcoming videos. Everything I used today is listed in the links below. I would love to hear from you, so let me know if you have any comments or questions. I hope you learned a few new tips and techniques to make your painting life a little easier and a lot more fun. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to our next painting adventure together. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference.